Why was Common Core initiated? What's the rationale?
It depends on who you ask, because you're going to get multiple answers. But the underlying idea that I constantly see when I've been out and about and I've talked to educators both for and against is they want every state to be really on the same page. So if little Johnny or Susie, their family has to move from one state to another state, then for the most part they'll be able to transition very seamlessly, which it sounds good on paper. The problem is that that's never the case. I can take in almost any school district that's supposed to be all on the same page, and eventually you'll get to the point where you'll have teachers that are 1 to 2, 3 weeks difference behind or ahead of the other school teacher. So it may sound good and it may look good on paper, but transitionally, I've never seen it happen in all the years that I've been in education.
So if the overarching concept is good, that we're going to standardize education for kids because of increased mobility in the nation, doesn't this just become a question of execution at the local level and making sure that all the local school boards have their Common Core ducks in a row?
No, and I hate to give such a quick pat answer on that. It may sound good, but the problem is that when you take a look at the overall aspects of Common Core, the standards themselves, and you realize that before Common Core was implemented, every state in the union had their own standards. So in essence, you had 50 microcosms of people trying to see what is best. California was generally leading the nation. A lot of times our standards were known as the gold standards. If you really wanted excellence in math or science or the English language arts, you looked to California. California was always, I'd say, in the top 4. Massachusetts, New York, and I believe Indiana were the 4th. What Common Core has inadvertently done, and some say, well, that it's not been inadvertently, is it's taken all the standards and kind of meshed them together so that some states, well, they received some better standards. But states like California, we didn't get even equal. We actually received substandard standards. And it's troubling when you think that California is here, for the most part, leading the nation in areas of research, computer technology, and so on. If we were leading the nation in standards, especially in, say, science and math, and now we've implemented standards that are not as good, it really begs the question, why would we do that? And it does give rise to the adage, it's almost like we're dumbing down our kids.
You have argued for local control over Common Core. Define local control and tell us why that's so important to you.
Local control, to me, is based on 2 aspects. One, it's having a responsive legislature at the state level, and in 2, having both school boards and parental involvement. When we look at the state legislature and their adoption, the beginning of the adoption of Common Core in 2010, they in essence surrendered local control by giving it over to not only to the feds, but to 2 private organizations based out of DC who generally have never had anything to do with standards, and nobody on their staff has ever written a standard, has ever been in the classroom. And so it kind of begs the question is, why are we going with these standards that have really been unproven? The argument that you'll hear is, well, we still have local control. Well, no, we don't, because these standards have been copyrighted, which goes to show you a governmental entity cannot copyright things. So for these to be copyrighted, they have to be privately owned. When one takes a look at the licensing agreement, and this should really motivate any parent to want to get involved, if anything, to just take a look at the standards. The licensing agreement specifically states that we make no claims as to the accuracy that's being presented, and if there are problems, you have to indemnify us.
You've stated that you don't believe there was a conspiracy or a cabal that got Common Core going, but nonetheless, there are for-profit companies that stand to reap tremendous revenue from the development and process, the ongoing process of Common Core. How does that for-profit angle affect the decision-making as to whether Common Core is working or not working, and what is taught, what's not taught?
I think one can simply pull from the words of Bill Gates, who he's been very open about pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into Common Core, for right or for wrong, where he has said two things that really stand out to me. One is, we won't know if these new standards are any good or successful until 10 years down the road.
It would be great if our education stuff worked, but that we won't know for probably a decade.
That's a gamble. So that's 10 years worth of schooling on children. You can't unring that bell. The second thing is he says that this will help to produce students graduating, and occasionally he'll say college and career ready, but what he has gone on to say numerous times is this will allow corporations to start grooming the kind of employees that they want. Now, I'm all in favor of corporations, whether it's mom and pop or it's Microsoft, in making sure that we have educated kids and that we have kids who are willing and able to work. I'm all in favor of that. I own a small business. But for the corporations to say, well, we're going to basically choose what's right for the kids and we're going to exclude the parents, now I have a huge problem with that.
Duke Pesta has a powerful 2-hour presentation. I know you've seen it. And he said last March that he has given this presentation across the country many, many times. And invariably, wherever he is, the audience is older. Most of the people, the overwhelming majority of the people in the audience, do not have kids in school. How does that affect whether Common Core is repealed or affect its progress in any way? Because we've got people, grandparents, many of them grandparents, who are just not invested in the system.
Well, I think first that that's a little bit of a misnomer, no offense, to say that the grandparents are not, invested into the system, because they are, because every grandkid wants their grandkids to do well. I think the reason why you see so many older people is because a lot of times they're the ones that have the time, as it were, to go. And this is proved a lot of times at our county board meeting here, where we see many of the people who are speaking are at least middle-aged to older, because a lot of them either they're retired or they're able to carve out the necessary time. If you look at most of, I'll say, the 20 and 30-year-old parents, well, their children are probably at school, but at the same time, most of them are out working a job, or they maybe do have a business. They don't necessarily have the time to just freely come before a board or to a meeting. And when the meetings are held at night, and I say this as a dad, if you've been out working and now you've got some family time, it's a bit draining to want to go and try to be as involved as you'd like to. And I don't really believe that the parents are not wanting to be involved. I just think a lot of them are overwhelmed. And at the same time, so many parents really believe that the teachers, the principals, the school boards all have their kids' best interest at heart. And I believe that too. I've never run across a cabal of teachers or administrators who are maniacally laughing somewhere saying, let's corrupt the youth. I've never seen that. So it's almost like the American ethos of just, well, they're teachers, we trust them. And at the same time, we're working really hard. It takes a lot of time and effort for us to even be involved a little bit. So I think that's why you see more the older people involved, is they're more freed up, they have more time.
Common Core is a major course correction in education. And yet, when it was initiated, most parents, I would say, just anecdotally, 3/4 of the parents in our district here, in Newport Mesa, were unaware not only of Common Core, but any of the specifics about it. And I think that that's probably true in many of the areas in Orange County. Again, just guessing. How did this happen? How did this enormous change, this revolution in education happen under the radar?
Well, first, I think you're being a bit generous by saying maybe only 75% didn't know. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find 1 in 1,000. The change has been pretty dynamic when you look at every school district needing to take the time to retrain every one of their teachers, from those who teach your advanced placements through the general education to special education, because I'm a special ed teacher, where virtually every teacher has to go through special training to be prepared to teach this new pedagogy, if you will. In regards to the lack of information, and yes, it was done underneath the radar. Whether that was intentional or not, I don't know. But I think the biggest problem that we're looking at is the legislature, at least here in California, signed on to accept Common Core before it was finished. So it was like almost trying to build an aircraft while you're flying it. You know, they accepted it sight unseen. But also, there was waivers being offered by the U.S. Department of Education because of the extremely horrific aspects of No Child Left Behind that were going to impose penalties and financial repercussions on the school districts. California actually decided not to accept what was Race to the Top funds. If they had done so, then they would have automatically been granted these waivers. However, local school districts, such as Santa Ana Unified, which I represent, it's one of 4 I represent, they did. So now they're on the horns of a dilemma. They did receive some waivers from the No Child Left Behind aspects, but unfortunately, and this is where I doubt 1 in 1,000 teachers even knows this as well, any school district that's received Race to the Top funds, it is mandatory that the year-end evaluations have to be tied to how well the students do on the Common Core testing. Well, what this inadvertently has now done is this has now focused the teachers to teach to a test. The very aspect that everybody has been decrying, and rightfully so, for years, I'd say probably a couple decades. It is, I don't think it's any hyperbole, any stretch to go to any teachers and to say, do you want to teach to a test or do you just want to teach? And I think virtually every teacher will say, well, yeah, I just want to teach. But if their evaluations are now inexorably linked to the Common Core testing, then these teachers have no choice but to make sure their kids do well on the Common Core testing, which now puts more stress on the kids because the testing is now over long periods of time over a computer network that really isn't all that secure.
You may have answered my next question, but just to amplify in case you want to. Of the parents who know about Common Core, there's tremendous opposition, there's tremendous uproar. Certainly, even those who are not opposed have serious questions about it. Why has there been no concerted effort on the part of local school boards or county boards of education to approach Sacramento and say, time out, we have some serious issues with Common Core?
I don't have an answer to that, and especially in regards to all the local school districts. I think in the state of California, we on the Orange County Board of Ed have definitely been the point of the spear on that. Having our 2 meetings that were in October and November of just this last year. We are looking at a lot of options. Part of the frustration is that how do you go about approaching a state legislature that has mandated that you implement Common Core, but at the same time, they couldn't explain to you what Common Core is or isn't?
Does it then just become a matter of money?
No, it doesn't. And the neat thing is that we on the Orange County Board of Ed are looking at initiating some lawsuits, both I'd say at the state and federal level. Now, generally, stuff like that would be cost prohibitive, but we're very fortunate that we actually have law firms now, good, honest, reputable law firms, some of whom are constitutional scholars, who have said, we will represent you pro bono, because they are concerned with where they see all this going. So to me, if we can't get the state legislature to really start listening to us, as seems to be the case, well, then we're going to have to take it into the courts. And on a quick side note, it seems to be kind of ironic that the CTA, the California Teachers Union, has not really come out against Common Core, because the Common Core is tied to the Common Core testing, where you could have teachers' jobs on the line.
Well, you started to answer my next question, which was, what is the feedback you've heard from teacher unions across the state?
They've been relatively quiet, and I think they're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I don't know why. When you have to take teachers, some of who've been teaching well over 30 years, and other teachers who maybe they're in their first 5 years of teaching, when you have to take virtually every teacher, regardless of their background, regardless of their teaching experience, and say, you're going to have to relearn how to teach stuff, I would think that the teachers union would be a bit concerned about that. Because in essence, and I don't think this was intended whatsoever, but my take on this is that you have just inadvertently given a slap to every university in California, and in essence across America, saying, yeah, we know that you trained these teachers, but you didn't really train them quite well enough, because these new standards have now come forward, and so we're going to have to take that upon ourselves.
Common Core, the worth of Common Core is being tested with Common Core tests. One argument, one constant argument, at least in our area, has been that when you take a new program and test it with a new test, it's impossible to determine whether Common Core works. That the actual testing needs to be done against the old STAR testing. Do you agree with that? If not, does that argument make sense?
The argument makes complete sense. And this is, again, another one of the aspects that's troubled me very deeply about Common Core. When I was full-time in the classroom, we gave out the STAR test, and it also was a fairly inexpensive test to give. A lot of it was also done basically like on a Scantron. It was either true, false, or multiple guess. It's like, okay. So the amount of time involved in grading it and the necessary manpower being able just to run these through, it wasn't a whole lot. The other thing with STAR testing, though, is it was all standardized, meaning that since we're here in Newport Mesa, regardless of where your son or daughter was going to 5th grade, it didn't matter which elementary school, you're going to be tested against really every other 5th grade student. And everybody knew that every child was going to receive the exact same test. Unfortunately, with Common Core, we've now found out that that's not the case at all. Common Core testing has literally thrown out any idea that there's going to be a common denominator, any type of standardized testing. We were fortunate to have some very brave students at a local high school where this one young man got 2 of his friends to take the test. They were in 11th grade. He purposely missed the first question, and the other 2 got it right. Well, when it came time for question 2, then you'd think like they're all going to get the same question. Well, no, he got a different question. He then answered that right, but he got one of the other 2 guys to purposely miss question 2. When it came time for question 3, all 3 of them had a different question. There is no standardization to this Common Core testing, so it's all very subjective. When you add to that the corporations that are now going to be grading this are paying anywhere from $11 to $13 an hour. There is no teaching requirement necessary. If you happen to have a teaching credential, or if you're just even a substitute teacher, that's a bonus, but it's not a requirement. And to me, I helped to grade some tests one year. I had to have special training for about 2.5 days to go over what is a rubric, what is the rubric, how do we apply the rubric. This wasn't something that you just willy-nilly grade. the training that these people are receiving is unknown to us. So I'm troubled by what I perceive as a lack of training, and more importantly, as a complete and utter lack of the testing being able to adequately and accurately show where each student is at in any type of uniform scale.
So just to clarify, just so that if for no reason then I make sure that I have this correct, the API style of comparison, where you could look at a child's school and see how this school did compared to other schools in the district or the state, that's going to be eliminated through Common Core because the testing is adjusted locally, or do I have that correctly?
You have it partly correct. The API scores right now are all frozen.
Right.
And it looks like they're going to be frozen for another 3 years. The trouble with that is we really don't know how the school is doing because there will be no real reportable results from the Common Core testing. Is the API going to be eventually thrown out and replaced? Maybe. But there's also been talk that they're going to have to come up with a different way to come up with the API score. Well, if you have a better way to come up with the API score, I'm all in favor of that. But the API score was always based on a standardized format in these subject matters that then you were able to compare this school with that school, knowing that both schools received the same test. You don't have that anymore. So inadvertently, I feel like they have managed to just take the entire API scoring system and thrown it into the trash can.
What should concerned parents do?
I would say that there's three things that they could do. One is, and this is going to take some time, is to go online and go directly to the horse's mouth. They need to Google, and I never thought I'd say Google as a verb, you know, or use Bing, whatever.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Is to learn about the Common Core licensing. Read what does the license have to say. And it's only like 2.5 pages. So it's a very easy, quick read. And then once a parent has read the licensing for themselves, then the second thing they need to understand is all the testing is going to be online. So that means every year we're going to have technological upgrades, licensing upgrades, and to start asking their local school boards, what are the projected costs on this? Because no school board can give you an actuary cost because we honestly don't know. And then the third thing is they need to find out who's going to have access to all this information. And unfortunately, the school districts won't be able to really tell you. Each parent can go look at the new FERPA laws. It's I think 38 pages long. It's available online, where unfortunately the school districts are now authorized to collect any and all data, including biometric, and even a school volunteer now can have access to the information. It's what it states, you know, in the new FERPA laws. So to me, they should be asking themselves, one, how can I learn about this? Well, go to learn about the licensing. Two, how is this going to affect my child in regards to getting into college? And then third is, what are the safeguards? They need to go and ask these hard questions of the school board. And when a school board continually comes back with, we're not sure, or, well, we'll have to get back to you, that should be a red flag.
You've been speaking out against Common Core. Others have been speaking out against Common Core. What is the plan? What's the strategy for, are we trying to reverse it and go back to the old way of teaching? What's the game plan? What would you like to see happen?
Well, what I'd like to see happen is for us to go back to the old 1997 standards. They were tremendous standards. And I think really about the best in the nation, and I think the best that the nation has ever had. And we are allowed by statute to actually do that. The second thing is, you know, when people have some extra time, is to understand if Common Core stays, what are going to be the ramifications of that? Well, when you can look up on, say, YouTube, not that, you know, YouTube is the authority to go to, but yet when you can watch a 1-minute and 20-second video of Dr. Jason Zimba who wrote the math standards and then states unequivocally that these standards will not get you into a 4-year university, but the Common Core math standards, as they are right now, will at best get you into a 2-year local college. I would think there'd be a lot of parents wanting to know, why are we doing this? Because, and here's the rub, if all of our kids can only go into a 2-year college and they cannot get into a 4-year university, that means that our kids are 1 to 2 years behind everybody else. Well, that means that USC, Berkeley, UC Irvine, whatever, they're still going to have freshman classes. But if our kids can't get into that, then that means they're going to have to accept more students from out of the country. Now, unfortunately, our kids are competing with a lot of other kids from other countries while at a disadvantage. We have never done that in the history of this country. And to do it now, I think it's criminal.
So, final question. Based on what you just answered and throughout this conversation, would it be safe to say in summary that Common Core fixed something that was not broken?
I would say that it managed to break that which was not broken. And hopefully we will be able to take some positive steps over the next 30 to 90 days to make a major course correction.